the heat can be especially dangerous for athletes. As students return to the classroom, athletes are returning to the field, spending hours in the scorching sun. So how do you help your player, your star player in your family beat the heat? Well, Dr. William Lloyd is back with us with some heat-saving tips and some life-saving tips for families out there. Dr. Bill, thanks again for joining us. I hope you don't have your bucket of ice this week.
No ice today, but maybe we should. It's August 7th. Jim, it's still the middle of the summer and people are going back to school.
That's right. And given the fact that the schools are reopening in early August, you got a lot of kids going back to the football field, back to the soccer field, and those kids are going to be dealing with some blistering temperatures. I mean, it has been historically hot in certain parts of the country this year. So what do you recommend? What are you telling parents?
Well, this can be a very dangerous time for them. Jim, it takes 10 days for somebody to acclimate to hot weather. And don't forget young people going to colleges far away where they may have been in a cool climate all summer. Now they're in a hot climate for football, cross country, or other sports. Locally, when your kid comes and says, hey, Dad, sign this sheet so I can play football, stop right there. Get out to the field. Find the coach, find out what's going on. What's their schedule? What kind of uniforms are they wearing? Is there a first aid kit? Is there sufficient water? How many adults are there relative to the number of athletes? And what's the attitude? Is it win at any cost, or what happens when somebody gets hurt? Are they respectful of the athlete, and do they take them out of action? And how many breaks? Important decisions like that. Look for the red flags before you let your kids sign up.
And I remember those summer two-a-days. I played high school football, and you know, I wasn't the star player on the team. Far from it. My high school classmates will remind me of that. But I do remember those two-a-days, and they were punishing. And there's just some coaches out there who are just going to drive those players, drive those student athletes, you know, come hell or high water.
Here's the formula on how to survive that intense heat. The first thing is loose clothing. In many school districts, they don't let the football players wear uniforms for the first 3 days. Nothing but T-shirts and shorts so they can get used to the heat. Make sure there's a buddy system. Make sure your young athlete pairs with another athlete so that you can keep an eye on each other as the practices go on. Like we've talked before, plenty of breaks, and make sure you take the breaks in the shade because direct sun raises the heat index by 15 degrees. Fluids, fluids, fluids. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And plenty of common sense. Tell your kids, if you don't feel right, leave the field. And if you're there watching, if you see a kid in trouble, even if it's not your own kid, alert the coach and get that kid into the shade.
That's great advice. And what are some of the warning signs that we should be looking for?
The #1 sign of a heat injury is a headache. If you hear a child complaining of a headache, get them into the shade. People don't know this. It's true. Your perspiration will go down. You'll stop sweating. But that's way too late in the process. And those kids that have stopped sweating are very, very sick. You'll notice a loss of thirst. Early on, when you're hot, you want to drink. But once you get into heat injury, you don't care about drinking. You become very nauseous and lethargic. You can't make sense of things. You're disoriented. These are important warning signs. And finally, you touch the child and you can feel how warm they are because literally, Jim, they're cooking. They're no longer perspiring, evaporating, or making their body cool.
And I wanted to ask you about this because, you know, a lot of these cases where you see a student get into trouble out on the field during these very hot days of the late summer and into fall, you know, sometimes the kids will have other medical complications that the parents didn't know about, or maybe that the school didn't know about. Doesn't that play into some of this?
Well, you know, we hear of stories like that this time of year of children with unfortunate heart anomalies and other problems dropping dead on the playing field. If your child is going into an organized sports program, there should be a medical program as well. And your young athlete ought to get screened beforehand by qualified medical personnel to make sure that they don't have the kind of problems that you're hinting at, specifically cardiac problems, most of which can be picked up by simply listening to the heart and seeing how the child performs in a high exertion environment. There are some rare occasions, though, where young athletes have a heart anomaly, and you know what? You could screen everybody in town, but you might not find it, and it doesn't make any economic sense. So check with your own doctor, make sure your kids are fully qualified, and make sure they drink plenty of water when they're out there on the field so they don't develop a heat injury.
And in terms of what to drink out there, is it just water? Just keep hydrating with water? Do those, you know, Powerade drinks, do those help?
Yeah, well, there's some simple rules. If you're going to be out in the sun for 2 hours or less, then just drink regular tap water. Your body knows what to do with the fluids. It just wants the fluids, let them have them. Typically 4 glasses every hour, after 2 hours, you got to think about an issue where maybe you're bringing in too much water. That could harm your sodium, and that could make you very, very sick. You hear about these people who are overhydrated. So if you're going to be out for more than 2 hours, then yes, start with the sports drinks. Typically, look at the electrolytes on the back. The major brands are all fine. You want no more than 6% of different electrolyte salts in those fluids, and mix them up 50-50 with regular tap water. You'll save a lot of money, and your kids will get both the fluid replenishment and the electrolytes that they need.
And I'm hearing something about the 5-pound rule. What is that all about? Is that something that parents should know about?
They sure should know about it. The 5-pound rule could save your child's life. During these first 3 or 4 days of fall training, when the weather is really hot, every morning you weigh your child before they go to school. And when they come home right after practice, you weigh them again. On any day during the first week, if they've lost 5 pounds during that day, they don't get to go to practice the next day, because that means they've suffered severe fluid loss. Even in football camp, you won't put on muscle the first 5 days, and you won't lose fat the first 5 days, but you will lose a lot of water. So any child that loses 5 pounds in one day has lost a lot of water, no practice for them, and that will teach them, that will reinforce them to get the fluids they need so that they won't be skipping practice.
Well, Dr. Bill, that's great advice for keeping those kids out there safe, and we appreciate it. I think I could have used some of that advice back in my days, which was a long, long time ago. We won't go into that.
You could have been a star, Jim. You could have been a star.
I could have been a contender, Dr. Bill. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
We'll talk again soon.
Sounds good.